on the other side of things, there's some very talented teams that aren't exactly living up to the expectations so far. And I want to ask you about a few of those teams and kind of just talk with you about what you think might be going on with those teams, or if it's really early, there's no need to worry here. But let's start with the New York Yankees, who at the beginning of this week got down to the very bottom of the AL East, which I think nobody saw that coming. So when it comes to the Yankees, obviously Judge on the IL, do you think this is all injury related, or are there some other concerns there?
I think there's a player or two on every team that you really can't afford to spend much time on the IL. And no doubt, Judge has to be healthy for the Yankees to have a presence, to have an impact. He does it in so many ways. He has a trickle-down effect in the lineup. He makes the guys in front of him and behind him so much better. The Yankees have been synonymous as well as the Mets have been synonymous with this regard. Mets have always had injuries in their rotation, and the Yankees have always had injuries in their lineup. And they haven't been able to shake it. I mean, there's a stat that talked about Stanton and Judge play only 20% of the time together, or some crazy number.
Jeez.
They have more depth in their rotation to kind of hide that. But there's some uncertainties creeping up that you don't want to be talking about. I've said all along that when you leave spring training, every player knows the warts and knows the strengths. And what you hope is the strengths hide the warts. Because if the warts get exposed, then you're talking about something you don't want to be talking about. And I know the Yankees left spring training going, okay, our bullpen's okay. We don't have the dominant closer. Can we bullpen it together and not be showing up? Well, that's kind of showed its ugly head of late. And can we stay healthy in our rotation so that we have that power factor, that we intimidate the other starting pitcher to the point where it has a carryover effect? But injuries are always the case. I don't care how much money you have, and I don't care how highly touted your team's going to be. If you have the wrong injuries to the wrong guys, It makes you normal. And right now the Yankees are normal.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. And I saw something, I think it was a couple of days ago, the Yankees IL payroll, the payroll of guys on the IL is higher than a lot of teams around the league. So obviously that's going to create a struggle for your team. Another team I want to ask about is the Houston Astros. And this one, I think the Astros will be okay. But my question to you is, they've been hovering around the 500 mark for a while. It seems like the Astros are capable of beating the best teams. Obviously, we saw them against the Jays win that series, sweep the Braves on the road, beat the Rays, the best team in baseball at the time, on the road, or still. And then they just seem to struggle against everybody else so far this year, and they're around the 500 mark. What do you see going on down there in Houston?
Kind of the same thing with their lightning stick, Altuve not being in the lineup. Yep. He's kind of the polar opposite of size with Judge, but he makes this about as big an impact as Judge does. And I think they're just a well-rounded team that once they get into their rhythm and they get the fluidity of their lineup going, again, there's 30 days that go by in every season. And once you get past 30 days, sometimes the identity of your club is the identity of your club. I don't think we've seen examples of the Braves in the last 30 to 40 games totally change the dynamics of their club and go on to deep runs. That's more of the exception than the rule. I just think clubs know when they leave spring training, when they get going, and that lineup doesn't have to have a lot of plug and place, and you can pencil that lineup in every day. The Astros are still the cream of the crop in the American League for me, and I know that's saying a lot because the Rays are on fire and dominating baseball. But everybody who gets to the World Series, or anybody who gets to the World Series, is going to have to go through the Astros, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They're deep. They've been there. They've done that, and they have a great confidence about them that they're not going to get carried away with any winning or losing streak one way or the other.
Yeah. A couple more teams to ask you about, and this one for me, in the last couple of weeks, I've been sort of sounding off about a little bit because I don't understand it. I can't comprehend what's going on there on the south side of Chicago with the White Sox. For the last couple of years, sure, you can point to an injury here or there, but you can point to a hiring here or there, but it just seems like something is wrong in the White Sox organization. This team is far too talented to be as bad as they are right now. I, unfortunately, picked them to win the AL Central based off of how talented they were, but I will admit it already. I don't think that's going to happen. What's going on with the White Sox, John?
Well, you might say they've lost their identity a little bit. They've got some people that are no longer there. Brayu's not there. Closer's an issue a little bit. Their starting rotation was starting to become their identity with their ability to hit in that ballpark. You know, you've got Anderson, one of the most exciting players, but when they don't have a consistency to their lineup, again, identity is something. What do you fear? What do you fear about a club when you go in there? And right now, it's a little less fearable, if you will, if that's a word. And I think because they've lost a little bit of that identity and that kind of not magic, but offensively they could thump. And really, I thought to start thinking that their rotation was going to start being their identity. And right now, it just hasn't clicked for them. A big part of Chicago and a big part of all those teams that play in the Midwest, when the weather stinks, you've got to give them a little bit more time than the teams out west or the teams in the South that have the luxury of playing and getting that kind of timing. And they've been playing through some pretty icky weather.
Yeah.
And it kind of can carry over in a ball club. You ask those on the South side as well. And you ask the people in Wrigley, you know, depending on the weather out of the chute can kind of determine if your timing is good, the hitters are struggling, they're playing in cold weather, rainy, all those contributing factors affect them more than it affects the other teams. And so I think a little bit of grace period here, but in the next 2 weeks, if things don't start turning around, then you can start shaping that your formula of what you think this team is or isn't. Because I think past 2 weeks, the weather shouldn't be an issue anymore, and the team should start regaining that identity.
I was thinking about this the other day when I was watching the White Sox game and Luis Robert Jr. didn't run out that ground ball. Now, I want to say for the sake of this question that there wasn't an injury at play and it was just him kind of being lazy and not running out a ground ball. Your Braves teams, you, Glavine, and Maddox were you were the leaders of that team, and I feel like you guys were vocal leaders of that team. Was there ever a situation where somebody on the field might have dogged it a little bit and you guys stood up and said something in the locker room, or was that kind of always Bobby's job to do?
Yeah, Bobby did a great job at doing that. And sometimes you need to know the information that nobody else knows. Like I've seen managers say, hey, we need you healthy. And if you got tender legs, which he's had issues before, if it's not a surefire hit, we don't need you going 100% every time. There are situations where that happens and a player gets burned because they don't know that information. So I'm not saying that this is a particular case, but maybe it might be where they need to keep him healthy. He has not been healthy. And lower leg injuries, 162 games, you know, what is it worth and what's the risk reward? Because I've said there and been there and done that before where I go, I can't believe this guy didn't run it out. And then come to find out his manager said, oh, by the way, heads up, he's got a tender hamstring and we don't want him doing that. And if they're okay with it, then everyone else should be okay with it. So those things, if they're understood, don't have fractions in a club. But when a manager makes a point to say, okay, I'm going to take you out of the game, I think that will solve the problem. And we've had a couple of those situations when Bobby took a guy out of the game, didn't have to say much, told the player individually that won't happen again, and he forgets about it and he gets back in the lineup. But if it happens again, then it's a doghouse situation and you don't want that.
John, last team for you, a former team of yours for a small period of time, the Cardinals. This team coming into this year, very talented. And again, it is early, but I guess the old saying, it's getting late early, happens for teams that are far under 500, like the Cardinals have gotten so far this year. I thought they would compete in the NL Central. I still believe they can, but they've dug themselves quite a hole. What do you see going on with the St. Louis Cardinals?
Yeah, one thing that everybody was high on is their offense was going to be great, and at least the possibility of them thumping and running and playing good defense was going to carry them through a division title. That was going to be their identity. But a lot of things that I was concerned about was how is the pitching staff going to come together and are they good enough? And right now they just haven't shown a consistency. Adam Wainwright hasn't been in there. But that one thing of their ball club was leaving spring training was going to be a little bit of a question mark in some people's eyes. So when that gets straightened out, then the St. Louis Cardinals will be straightened out. And I think the St. Louis Cardinals do enough outside of pitching to help them win enough baseball games to get them back in the mix. They say in a golf tournament, you can't win it in the first round, but you can lose it.
Yeah.
They're dangerously coming close to losing an opportunity here in the first round of the season, because you got to be in the mix. You can't let somebody run away. I don't know if anyone's going to run away and hide in that division. I don't think Pittsburgh can stay at that rate, but don't tell them right now. They're having fun stealing a ton of bases and scoring a lot of runs. So I'm not a big believer in getting too much of the quarter. When you get to the quarter part of the season, getting too carried away with a team. But I also don't want to be 15 games out.
Yeah.
I think players lie all the time and say they don't pay attention to schedule or the standings. I hear managers say, I don't look at anything till after the All-Star break. Well, I think they lie a little bit, because if the All-Star break's 20 games back, what are you looking at?
Yeah.
There's nothing to look at. So one eye on the standings and one eye on your team was always be a scenario I would pay attention to. And I think the St. Louis Cardinals will ultimately stick together enough and find a way to get somebody hot in their rotation. But understand, they have pitchers and not necessarily a ton of stuff guys where they swing and miss. So they rely on contact, strike, defense, and offense. So they need a few more components than people would have realized. Everyone loves the corner of their infield, and everyone loves certain components of their offense, but you're going to have to be a little bit more pitching eccentric to be able to navigate the whole schedule.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you play your division 19 times, which their division typically was, in theory, supposed to be weaker. You're playing a collection of everybody, and now the schedule is going to be more competitive.
Yep.